Iraq Shia Coordination Framework has just nominated a political newcomer, Ali al-Zaidi, as prime minister, a businessman with ties to a US sanctioned bank suspected of money laundering and a network of state contracts. Omar, should Iraqis be worried?
Certainly, many of them are concerned that once again you have a prime minister being nominated in a way that is completely divorced from the results of the past election.
Today is Friday, May 1st, and the time in Iraq is 11 p.m. The Strait of Hormuz has now been effectively closed for more than 50 days. Welcome to your Iraq briefing. I'm Erik Gustafson with Enabling Peace in Iraq Center, and I'm joined with my colleague Omar Al-Nidawi. So, Omar, tell us, who is Ali Al-Zaidi, the prime minister designate who's been nominated by the Shia Coordination Framework? I don't even think he had a Wikipedia entry until maybe 2 or 3 days ago. Give us a quick profile about his background, career trajectory, and how he came to be the nominee.
Yeah, actually, very little is known about Ali al-Zaidi. I bet most Iraqis have not heard of his name until the announcement came that he was nominated to be the next prime minister. There's even a debate about what year he was even born. Some people say he was born in 1981, some people say he was born in 1986. But people do agree that he was born in the town of Al-Shatra in the Qarb province from the south, and that he has degrees in finance and in law. So he's a lawyer and a financier by training. His background is purely seems to be of business, not of politics. He was not known as a political actor. He had not held any government positions that we know of. But his business seems to have taken him closer and closer to the circles involving Prime Minister Mohammed al-Sudani. His one of his cousins was a candidate on Prime Minister Sudani's list in the recent election, and actually was elected from Baghdad province on the list. So there is a electoral cooperation that preceded the nomination. The Zaidi family, I'm not sure exactly if it's Ali himself or his cousin, own the Dijla TV network, reportedly, which is a prominent TV network in Iraq. That's also a an avenue that can bring business people very close to politics and implies actually political ambitions because the two are inseparable. Ali Zaidi is also known for being a chairman of a bank, the Al Janoub Islamic Bank, which is one of the banks that were banned from conducting transactions in the Iraqi sorry in the U.S. dollar by the Iraqi central bank on the advice of the U.S. Treasury. So there were some suspicions or at least concerns that some improper financial transactions, potential money laundering were happening there. So that's all really we know about Ali Zaidi. It seems that the links to the through his cousin to some people say his brother, but I'm comparing the names and it seems like it's his cousin. That link to Prime Minister Sudani may have been the path that propelled him or put him on the front of the list to make the nomination. Hopefully, we'll know more about him in the coming days and weeks as more of public attention is focused on him, and that naturally unearths more information in the future.
Interesting. And I mean, he wasn't elected to parliament. This is like just they just pulled him right from the
Exactly.
oligarchs of
Yeah.
Iraq. Yeah. Uh,
Yeah.
so how did the Shia coordination framework arrive at his nomination? You mentioned this connection to Sudani, but walk us through the internal process and who backed him and who didn't. Was it a consensus?
Yeah, so those who have been following events in Iraq know that there was an election in November of last year, and so there has been 5 months of literally nothing happening, just a internal debates among the factions of the coordination framework and the the political elites at large to try and figure out who's going to be the next prime minister. And this process was extended or delayed and put on hold for a while by the conflict between the U.S. and Iran. And Ali Zaidi emerged as a compromise candidate after the major contenders, the main initial contenders, Noor al-Maliki and Mohammed al-Sudani, the outgoing prime minister, they basically withdrew their nomination. If you rewind the reel of events, you probably remember that in January, Noor al-Maliki was announced as the initial candidate for the premiership by the coordination framework. He faced major backlash from President Trump, who said this is a very terrible, bad choice for Iraq. If Iraq goes with this choice, then there will be dire consequences for the country and its relations with the U.S. Uh, that, of course, forced the coordination framework to kind of like reconsider its option. Ahmed al-Sudani, who had initially stepped aside from the competition in favor of Maliki, returned basically as a contender in the last couple of weeks. And two uh, the two men, Sudani and Maliki, were competing vigorously for the nomination. Initially, directly, for their to get the nomination for themselves, but then they realized that that was not going to produce an agreement because it polarized the coordination framework to the point of almost of a fracture. So they pulled back and decided to find proxies and nominate, let's say, people who represent them or their interest, but not themselves directly. And there were several names that were floated as potential compromises, including the um the office chief or the chief of staff of Sudani and former Prime Minister Haider Abadi, and also the chief of the Iraqi intelligence service. Suddenly, all of these names disappeared, and Ali al-Zaidi came out of nowhere. And the document showing his official nomination by the coordination framework shows that only 9 out of the 12 coordination framework chieftains have actually physically endorsed the nomination. 3 seem to have abstained from signature, although they have abstained from signing. They have not signed the document, although at the same time they have not publicly come out and raised objections about the nomination.
Yeah, and I saw in the latest issue you mentioned it's so Haider al-Abadi is one of those who did not sign. Uh, Human Hamoudi, who's with the Supreme
Imam
Islamic,
Hamoudi, yes.
yeah,
Mhm.
Hammam Hamoudi, and then Abu Ala al-Walai, uh, who's with one of the militias, the Iran-backed militias.
Yeah, it's not a real name. It's the name that he goes by. Wala'i literally means the loyalist, and that
Mhm.
means the loyalist implied to the Islamic Revolution.
Yeah.
And yeah, he just had a $10 million reward placed on his head by or for information on him by the by the State Department. So interesting times.
Yeah, yeah, and maybe a reason why he didn't show up to sign. So tell us how key stakeholders have responded to his nomination. What has been the reaction among the Sunni and Kurdish political blocs, as well as by external actors like the United States, Iran, and Gulf states?
I think the bottom line is that he is not Nur al-Maliki. So I think a lot of people who are holding their breath are, maybe were uh, relieved by the choice. Even though, again, Ali Zaidi is an unknown quantity here, but no one has raised objections about the nomination. Sunni and Kurdish parties, all the major ones, have welcomed the nomination. They congratulated Zaidi on his new task or position, and so did the U.S. Embassy and the UK Embassy, Arab states, and actually yesterday President Trump spoke with Ali al-Zaidi and also seems to be in approval, and he seems to think that the guy is a good choice. But that's what does Trump know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, he's a fellow business guy, right? A fellow oligarch.
Yeah, the main objection that Trump had to Nur al-Maliki was that he was too close. He was perceived to be too close to Iran-backed militias,
Mm.
and for some reason now Trump thinks that this does not apply to Ali Zaidi. But at the end of the day, any candidate emerging out of the coordination framework is essentially a product of the consensus among the coordination framework leaders, most of whom are militia leaders or have people who have very close ties to Iran. There are very, very few figures within the coordination framework who could be described as not close to Iran.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I mean, again, it raises questions about to what extent are we going to see any reforms under government of um, Al-Zaidi, given that he benefited from state contracts and a lot of the
Indeed.
corruption that's been happening.
Indeed, it's quite unlikely. Again, he's a product of the same system. He
Mm.
is gives the same vibes that Sudani did maybe 3 years ago. That he's a managerial character who is there to put a pretty face on another coordination framework government and look good in front of the world and in front of the Western powers. But I think at the end of the day, if you look at again his business, his background, his whether directly his personal business or his family's business, they are tied to government, abuse of office essentially, and it's really very difficult to see how that is going to lead to any reforms in terms of fighting corruption or creating a meritocracy or reducing abuse of power by political elites.
Wow. Yeah, not encouraging. So let's like think in terms of the personality of Al-Zaidi in terms of being a politician, because he's now a politician, right? So how does Al-Zaidi compare to recent prime ministers in terms of age, experience, political base, governing style? I mean, political base. I guess he has ties to all parties because he did business with all parties. But and how does it stack up when you look at previous prime ministers, the current prime minister Sudani, or prime ministers like Haider al-Abadi and Nouri al-Maliki?
First, he's going to be the youngest of all prime ministers of Iraq since 2003, and maybe even before that. And he has no political base of his own whatsoever. I mean, and that's kind of a departure from past cases, from tradition. Even Iraqi prime ministers who lacked a strong political base of their own, like Sudani, he had one member of parliament from his party, basically, or Adel Abdel Mahdi, who had no direct representation of his own in parliament, but they had at least they belonged to political parties and to political establishments, and they had previous government experience, sometimes
Yeah.
substantial government experience.
Yeah.
Adel Abdel Mahdi was Minister of Oil. He was a vice president, a deputy prime minister. Sudani had been a cabinet minister and a member of parliament. Even Mustafa al-Kadhimi, who was not elected and was not a public political figure, had served in government as the chief of Iraq's intelligence service. So every prime minister had come from with some background in governance or politics. Ali Zaidi comes with neither, and
Mhm.
so that's I think a big difference from the past. But I think where he is, where similarities I think appear is that, and I think this is a core feature of every prime minister who has been chosen for Iraq, is that they are supposed to be non-threatening, and I think political weakness is perhaps a feature, not a bug. The political elites want a prime minister who is not going to be sticky in office and not going to try and accumulate power and perhaps start to accumulate autocratic tendencies, as was the case with Nur al-Maliki himself. And this explains actually why there was a lot of ambivalence or even hostility towards allowing Mohammed al-Sudani to have a second term in office, because that's when real power accumulation can happen, and people feel that they might be able to, go outside of consensus and start to build their own empire to the detriment of the people who put them in office.
Yeah. So, of course, there's a lot of politics going on behind the scenes. It will be interesting to see how this plays out. I think the rivalries continue and will continue to play out, right? Despite the fact that there's now a designee. But what happens next in terms of the government formation process? What are the key hurdles that Ali al-Zaidi will now have to negotiate to get across the finish line?
The process constitutionally is rather straightforward. The prime minister designate has 30 days to put together a formation for his cabinet and to present that cabinet to parliament to ideally win a vote of confidence, and then from that begin to govern. Uh, Usually, the process is complicated because there's a lot of horse trading, as we say, to figure out who gets what. And this is a process that can sometimes take, that often takes longer than the 30 days. And there are, of course, a lot of underlying divisions and competition and for power and resources among Iraq's political parties. That's all going to rise to the surface during the process. But again, it's not going to be very different from, I think, what Iraq has seen in the past, in that the prime minister really is not in charge of its own cabinet. It's the cabinet members are nominated by the political parties, and they are there to serve the interests of the political parties that have put them, uh, that have enabled them to get a seat at the cabinet table. So that's one thing that we're probably not going to see change in this cabinet.
Yeah, 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 and I mean, I think, of course, what continues to be unfortunate is that it's a maintenance of a status quo that doesn't really lead to reforms, doesn't lead to accountability, doesn't lead to meeting a lot of the challenges that Iraq desperately needs to meet.
Yeah.
Mm.
And if I want to add one more thing, perhaps, is that, and this is an important factor I think that will play a role in shaping the next government, is the increased U.S. pressure and interest in excluding figures who are close to the militias from cabinet positions. It is going to affect and complicate the negotiations because it's essentially going to exclude people that political parties and militias are going to want to be nominated, and that's going to potentially prolong the process. So that's something to keep an eye out for.
All right, all right. Well, all everybody who's watching, you can keep an eye out for all of these details by going to enablingpeace.org. Subscribe to our weekly Isham, the Iraq Security and Humanitarian Monitor, that Omar, that you put out every week. And we have a lot of new content on our website, including some new reports. So take a look, enablingpeace.org. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed the show, share us with your friends and colleagues. We look forward to joining you soon. Bye.